All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to Balancing Work, Life, and Art. We're so grateful to have you with us from wherever you're tuning in from. I'm Abigail Ogilvy of Abigail Ogilvy Gallery in Boston, Massachusetts. Very excited about this group of interesting panelists today and want to introduce my co-host and assistant director, Kaylee Hennessey. Kaylee is working out of the gallery in Boston right now, so should she need to quickly turn off her camera and multitask and balance work and life, she might have to at some point. And then, of course, welcome to our artists, Nathaniel Price and Susan Murie. Thank you both so much for your time today. So to jump in and just give you a little background on the two artists today, we have Nathaniel Price, who's a multidisciplinary artist. He creates sculpture, works on paper, and conceptual artworks, and is based in Cambridge, Mass. And in addition to being an artist, he's a primary care doctor and a teacher at Harvard Medical School and MIT. And Susan Murray's current practice focuses on cyanotypes on paper, inspired by a sense of home and belonging, while also informed by her previous work as a gardener for many years. Additionally, Susan is a realtor in the greater Boston area. So we're so happy to have you both here today. I'll stop talking and hand it over to you. Susan, let's hear from you first. We'd love for you to briefly discuss your artistic practice, but then also give us a little insight into what you do in addition to being an artist.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I am basically a photographer. I've been a photographer for a long time, and I used to hand color photographs. That was my thing. I used to teach it. I had a darkroom. I did that for a long time, and then I was ready to try something new, and I found cyanotype probably back around 2007. And I've worked in that ever since. It's such a compelling and interesting medium that keeps sort of unfolding for me, and just stays exciting. And so that's what I do. And I work quite large, and I do a lot of botanical subjects, but also other, as you can see on the screen, some other subjects as well. I work out of my home studio, and I do teach cyanotype making as well. And that's basically it. It's a photographic medium. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a photographic medium. It's a handmade process, which is something I really like about it. And it's an emulsion that's brushed on paper or another porous surface, and you put negatives or objects like flowers or leaves on top of that paper, and then it's exposed to UV light. And I use the sun, and that reacts, the coating reacts to the UV light, and whatever is on the paper stays white or a light blue, and then everything else turns a dark blue. And then it's just washed with water. So that's just a basic description of the process. And then for my work life, I work right now as a realtor. And as Abigail mentioned, I used to be a gardener. And the gardening definitely informed my work. And with real estate, I find that the business end of being an artist, the marketing and the presenting yourself is really similar to real estate, and you can apply the same principles to your business as an artist. Getting into shows and just staying organized, and meeting new people and approaching galleries and things like that are really similar to approaching a client to getting a real estate listing. It was easy for me to apply those skills to real estate when I decided to get into it. After being in business for myself as a gardener and then also being an artist, they're really, really similar.
Great. Nathaniel, over to you. I see you've switched back to having headphones.
Yeah, I'll probably go back and forth. first of all, I want to just say thanks so much to Abigail and Kaylee for organizing this topic that I have aggressively tried to run away from talking about publicly for 25 years. And then I also wanted to say thanks so much to Susan for joining us. And I think that your paintings look just beautiful, Susan. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that relationship to gardening and the work. And I really enjoyed speaking with you a few days ago when we first met and started talking. In terms of myself, you're welcome. In terms of myself, just like Abigail outlined, I've been working in a variety of different mediums for quite some time. And then I also have other responsibilities as a primary care doc and as a teacher. And I think much like Susan, I think there are a lot of parallels between the work that I do in the different areas of my life and how they communicate and talk with one another. And I think that it's a rather large topic in my own, I suppose, in my own mind when I'm talking to myself about these things. But I think that that in many ways over the last year it's even different because of what's going on outside of the orbit of the studio and anyone's particular work, and it's all very much influenced by this COVID pandemic. And in some ways, I think that we've all become clinicians, either amateur or professional clinicians, and the relationship between what's going on in the world and in our own bodies and in the bodies of family members and friends. I think that we're all looking at what's happening, and I can't see it not informing what we're doing in our lives. And in many ways, it's very much what I do in the studio and in my world outside of the studio, if that's a bit of an introduction.
Yeah, that's great.
Do we need more?
You spoke about yourself. We're really proud of you, Nathaniel.
So yeah, I guess Nathaniel, if you could build off of this, and I'd love to hear from both of you on this too. How do you both divide your time in order to still create artwork? Do you have like a schedule that you've established for yourself, and do you have any tips for trying to do the same right now?
Nathaniel, go ahead, you go first.
Yeah.
I go first?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's different. I think this is different because the cadence of the day and the month and the week is changing through the course of the trajectory of the pandemic. And so my responsibilities have changed and evolved at different points in time. But pre-pandemic, it was relatively predictable in terms of the way that my schedule would work. And I would carve out time most days to come to the studio. Typically, in terms of the trajectory of a weekday, it would be working at the clinic or teaching, and then in the evening I would go to the studio for several hours, and then that was usually the parameters of that are related to other external things. I would typically go to the studio, and then I have to pick up my daughter who's in swim team. When her swim team's over at 9:15, I go and pick her up, and then we go home and have dinner. And that's the cadence of the weekday. And the weekends are similar, although different. And some of the days are slightly different during the week as well, in that I try to carve out time most days to come to the studio. And I usually am in the studio around 20 hours a week in general. And you have to also kind of understand that the week itself is, when you're training to become a doctor, you're used to work weeks that are, 70, 80, 90 hours a week. So to have an additional 20 hours a week to work in the studio is not such a huge change.
Yes, but I would say for the maybe younger, more emerging artists that are tuning in today, I think it's incredibly impressive to hear someone talk about having a full-time job, have 20 hours there, still a lot to the studio. And then I know you mentioned your daughter, but you have 3 children, so you have plenty on your plate. And it's,
Yeah, I think that everyone's busy actually, and everyone is trying their best to do what they can and when they can, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that, just in terms of the rationale for doing any of these things, and why it is that we do make things, and what it is that we're trying to do, and both for ourselves and for other folks, but to trying to approach some kind of um, meaningful interaction with the world. And I think that if that's your sort of goal and aspiration, then it's easy to be pulled into that orbit. And I think that I actually, ever since I was speaking with Susan, and I know that I'm maybe being premature in talking about schedules, but I am sort of drawn to some very fundamental aspects of meaning, and what the relationship is to things like the plants and the earth, and the cycle of the earth. When I think about some of your work, Susan, I don't know if at one point you'll be able to talk about that in relation to your gardening.
Well, it actually relates to this question that Kaylee asked us about dividing our time and what our schedule is like. And mine is completely different from yours, Nathaniel, in a lot of ways. Like, first of all, my work revolves around the sun, literally. And some days I don't really feel like working, but it's the only day in the week that there's sun. And so I'll like haul stuff out and I'll go and do it because the sun's there. But I plan my work, around the sunlight. In terms of making the prints, the actual prints, there's a lot I do beforehand to get ready. So I can do that in the off days. But also, I never really enjoyed a strict schedule. It doesn't work well for my personality. And so that's why one of the reasons I chose to have my own gardening business, and I chose to go into real estate, because I have somewhat more control over my schedule. When I became a realtor, one of the things I wanted was to be home for my daughter when she got home from school. She was like a young teenager, and I just wanted to always be home, and or close to home. And so that gave me that freedom. And also, though, real estate's a little unpredictable. Sometimes a client will call me out of nowhere and say, I want to see this home. I've got to get in, and I've got to kind of drop everything and go and do that. So I'm used to that rhythm in life, and I allow myself like space in my day for the unexpected, and I don't have a set schedule weekly. I can like know tomorrow what I'm going to be doing pretty much, although sometimes real estate will throw in a wrench. But I can usually fit it in because I've allowed myself to have big blocks of time where I'm doing like nothing, but never doing really nothing. The pandemic didn't actually change my real estate. Was still going. People are still buying and selling property, which is really interesting. It's just kind of people's plans didn't change somewhat. And my art, I've been continuing to work. I haven't addressed the pandemic directly in my work, but I'm working through it. And so my days are somewhat similar. It's just, the social aspect is definitely different in my life. But so I think our schedules are really completely different, the way we schedule our day, which is understandable. And I'm comfortable working in that. And so, yeah, I do work, I don't really shoot that much in the winter. I don't really do much with a wintry landscape in my work. I might do it for my own personal, fun, but it doesn't show up in my work. I can shoot flowers anytime, though. I often do buy them and bring them in, shoot at home. I have some right in back of me. There's a great florist here in town, and they have beautiful flowers and plants and things. And sometimes I go outside and photograph out in nature too. But I don't do a lot with winter in my work, that's for sure. I've been thinking about that too, like I think I have one picture of snow on some branches that I made into a cyanotype once, but generally, I don't shoot in the winter, but I do work in the winter. I still print. I still like get out on the porch, catch those rays of sun.
Yeah,
Great.
it's
Oh, go ahead, Nathaniel.
no, I just think that those are very compelling themes, using the light of the sun to generate images, thinking about the cycle of the year, the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter, where things all kind of lock down. And then, of course, the spring again, this cycle. And I definitely feel like the cadence of your work life sort of mirrors that cycle of the year, the season,
Yeah, totally.
life,
Yeah, for sure. Does it
in a way, you're really wedded to it.
Does it have any impact on your work?
Well, I mean, I think that if you use the parallel of the cycle of life, it definitely does. I think that there's no question that there's a relationship to life and our place in it, in my work and my own sort of aspirational mind, to be sure. How that plays out, in terms of the work, it's a little bit more challenging, but I guess there are some images that are being shown.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up some images of your work since you have a range and styles, and I think it'll be helpful for people to see what we're talking about when we're referencing it. But I think circling back to what you said kind of at the beginning of the conversation, where you said, for the past 25 years, you've been trying to hide the fact that you were a doctor when showing people your work or talking about your work. And then I found it interesting when we were having preliminary conversations about this event that, Susan, you also felt there was this really divide where you were really keeping things separate between being a real estate agent and being an artist. I'd be interested to hear you talk about that a little bit, like why, Nathaniel, you want someone to come in with such a fresh eye and without knowing that about you already.
Well, I think that it's really probably more than just one answer. I'll try to approach it anyway. I think that questioning where the work really lives is an interesting one. I mean, does it live in the object? Does it live in the person who made it? Does it live from the perspective of the viewer, or some sort of territory in between those 3 points? And I would probably argue it kind of lives in that space between those 3 areas. And I think that I guess I'm sort of worried about the gravitational pull of the perception of the person who made it, influencing the view from the viewer. There's a lot of cultural weight associated with being a physician, and I certainly don't mind talking about it in I suppose what I would consider a little bit more of an unpacking rather than a veneer sort of approach to things. But there are clear allusions to things that I come across in the work, or rather in my job as a caregiver and my job as a clinician, and some of them are relatively quick to come across, and we certainly talk about it in very direct terms when I'm talking to folks that are learning about the world of medicine, and I suppose the suicide cube is a good example of that, in that there are so many dangers associated with medicine and things that we do, and one example of that are the hazards associated with medications themselves. And up until relatively recently, Tylenol was the one of, if not the most dangerous medicine, or the root ingredient of acetaminophen in the States and paracetamol in the rest of the world. And obviously that's been eclipsed by the hazards associated with opioids in the last 15 to 20 years. But people don't realize that if you just take a simple bottle of Tylenol that's easy to access, you know, on the shelf of your local pharmacy, that will easily, you know, be very serious, if not terminal, to consume. And so in this situation, you know, I just took that bottle of Tylenol and I glued them together into a cube.
I think something that's, I mean, from my point of view, I do find it hard to separate once I knew that you were a primary care doctor from the work, because
Yeah.
I don't know another artist. So this piece we're looking at here, it's, you know, we just wanted to show the scale of the work on paper that the person is looking at. And then here's a similar piece in the series. So as you can see, there's this kind of silhouette of the human form, but what you can't see from a distance is that as you get close, that gray area is actually handwritten, anatomically correct, is that accurate? Parts of the,
Yeah.
human form.
Yeah, you know, I think that in terms of certainly this piece in the context of the discussion with Susan, I feel that there are maybe some parallels to this discussion about the cycle of the day, the cycle of the year, the cycle of the life. But in some ways, it's a similar sort of origin to the discussion about the Tylenol tube, in that, you know, I spent 18 months in an anatomy lab and was, you know, crouched over these anatomy textbooks, and they're full of text and descriptions and pictures, and I simply just peeled away the picture and chose to make an image out of the descriptions of the human body and put them in an anatomically correct location. And actually this is really part of an arc of drawings that took place over 6 drawings, and they start out with the words contained within the form of the silhouette, and those are anatomically correct words, and there's this sort of pull, this migration of text outward to the outside of the human form, and there's a rule that I made, and the rule was that as the words migrated out, you'd be left with things that go wrong with the human body, the so-called pathologies. And so you have this kind of tension in one of these in-between drawings, and at the end you're left with a hollowed out form with no information inside and only things that go wrong on the outside. And, you know, in a weird way, they're sort of completely oppositional, but also quite similar in terms of the way they look. And I think that there is definitely this sense of a relationship to the cadence of the cycle of life, you know, through I suppose, the window of some of these medical terms and descriptions. But I think that the premise of what Susan is doing is very kind of, at least resonates for me. And I think that my window is sort of the human form to a large degree. But I think that if you think about the human form also as being, you know, a part of the world and life, and how it fits and how it doesn't fit, and how we're kind of, this weird relationship to nature is also fascinating to me. You know, I don't know if you want to sort of dive into that, and even in the way that your images look, Susan, like the sort of sense of like falling and this relationship to decay and life is I think anyway in there. When
you get me, Nathaniel. You get me. I actually love to hear what people get out of the work, because, you know, sometimes it's something different, but when people say things that I've been thinking about, it's pretty gratifying. So thank you so much. I think in terms of like separating my, you know, work life from my art making life, I do it less now. I you know, with real estate clients, my interaction is about them, and it's about, you know, what they're trying to achieve, if they want to buy or sell a home, and our focus is on that. And so you know, it depends on the client, and sometimes I'll, you know, because we're together for this short period of time, but it's an intense period of time, and there are times where chit chat is like, there's room for that, and I might bring it up that I do that. I just, you know, I don't want my clients to feel that my focus is, you know, elsewhere, you know, when I'm working with them. And so, you know, I guard that sometimes, just so that they feel, you know, confident about what I'm doing with them. But, you know, it is what I also do. And actually the broker I work with this year asked if she had a big house with big walls to fill, and she asked me if I would bring some of my work over to put up, and we did that, and it's a gorgeous house, and plenty of room for large pieces, which I was just so excited, because it's, you know, you don't often get a chance to show large pieces in some spaces, and it was really cool to be able to do that, and it was that, you know, I even did a social media post about it, because it was like the intersection of my two parts of my life, two of the parts of my life. So, but, you know, other than that, I mean, sometimes I'll see a certain architectural detail or a window or something in a garden when I'm out looking at property, and I'll get a picture because I just really like it. And I have used elements from my tours of homes in my work. There's one behind me. So, you know, that's, and also just like I mentioned before, using the skills, marketing skills is useful for the two of them. And then of course my gardening business when I had it, and I really had it up until, you know, physically I did the work until about 2010. And then I've been consulting until just a couple of years ago. So it was still a part of my everyday life. But now I don't do the gardening anymore, just the real estate and the artwork. But thanks for mentioning the falling, decaying bit of the piece about my work, because I do a lot of that. I want it to be tumbling down. And as much as gardens are full of life and beautiful, they're also, you know, the other side of life, there's decay. It's that cycle that it feeds itself. And our job as a gardener was most of the time pulling out the overgrowth, because the weeds are the most, you know, lively and the most cunning of how they keep going and where they grow, so that it's difficult to get them. They're almost animated for me, because they're very clever. These weeds are very clever, and they're the ones that last, and they take over everything. So that sort of figures into my work too, is the messiness of nature and our need to kind of try to tame it. That's about it. Yeah.
Great question from the audience. I think you'll both be able to speak really well to this. Do you feel like you have to limit your artistic expression because of your day job?
Not if it's a secret.
That's fair.
You know, can I just, Susan, you go ahead and answer that question. Then I want to go back to some of the things that you were talking about, which I also think are really interesting. I guess to sort of directly answer that question, Kaylee, I because I really try not to have the two worlds overlap a ton, except for very intimate people. Not really, no. Maybe I should. No, but not really, no. I haven't felt the need to edit any of the work that I do.
Yeah, same. I do what I want to do, and I don't. There's nothing I keep from anybody about the work I do. I mean, it's all out there. It's all out there on social media. Anybody, if you type in Susan Murie, you'll get either the realtor or the artist, and it's easy to go and see what each of those people is doing. So yeah.
I did feel a little bit weird about it when I almost got arrested a couple of times doing some work, though. That was a little, it was tough.
Can you tell us
When
about
the police
that?
come up to you and are like,
Wait a
what's
minute.
going on, buddy?
Couldn't you lose your license if you got arrested?
That's a good question. I don't know. It was,
I think I
there was
could.
one piece where I did a sort of a long walk where I was dragging a piece of chalk, which was my body volume, through the towns of Somerville, Cambridge, Arlington, Lexington to Concord, and I sort of dragged it from my studio to the Massachusetts Correctional Institute, the MCI in Concord, and as it kind of went, it wore down until there was nothing left. And at different points in time, people, I think, it's chalk, so we'll go away. But they were worried about me defacing the path and the street and so on. So the police came up to me a couple of times and questioned me at different towns, and I would tell them, but it did cross my mind briefly. In terms of the discussion with Susan about the cycle of life, I just kind of want to go back to that. You sort of talked about control and weeds, and it definitely made me think of I don't know if anyone remembers that documentary from Robert Hughes, the American Visions documentary from a couple of decades ago. He was this art critic who's kind of a little bit, I think, controversial actually. But he talked about the relationship to nature and the wild of the Puritans, and how the Puritans would make these elaborate dressers and tables, and they would often depict elements of the wilderness. And his sort of take on that was it was an effort of taking things like the woods that were sort of thought to be, I think, really dangerous, and then rendering it in the form of an artwork. And I think it's a little bit more complicated, the relationship to nature, but you can see that in other sort of forms of artwork. Obviously things like the lightning fields of Demara's work, and actually harnessing nature and into a piece of artwork. And I think that's a really interesting thing to have a relationship to.
Oh, I think I think that's really true, that we, at least for me, it seems like we really revere nature. It's beautiful and it calms us when we're in it, but we're also, terrified of it too, in a primal way, because especially in the woods or something like that, where we're in the elements and there's this maybe danger around the corner or in the woods, or it's sort of an instinctual thing.
Yeah,
and it's interesting.
I think it's such an interesting topic. I've been reading the book of Michael McCarthy. I don't know if you've read it, the Moth Snowstorm book. Have you read that book?
What's it called?
The Moth Snowstorm and sort of nature and joy. And he talks about this sort of dynamic relationship to nature, and that it really is related to so many very kind of primitive, both practical and emotional sensibilities, but one of which is this sort of sense of fear of nature, being afraid of things that can kill you, basically, in nature. But then also that ultimately nature is a refuge also from the frenetic pace of modern life, and it's a very interesting framework to think about the relationship to the natural world.
And also,
and it's not just one thing.
Also, like, we're a part of it, but also it can go on without us. And
well, the relationship and the impact of humans on nature is obviously a major thrust in his narrative too, and that we're a tremendously destructive force, even though it's to nature. And I would say that one of the things that fascinates me in my own work is not just, and in a way it sort of parallels the relationship people to people or ourselves to ourselves, that we have this capacity to be destructive, and yet we can be joyful too, and provide things that have meaning. And I would maybe sort of argue that some of the things that we try to approach in whatever kind of vocabulary we have in art is to try to look for things that are beautiful and you know, in this book, McCarthy talks about this thing of joy and what is joy, and and how you know, we find it and what's important, and he uses that term to sort of orbit around this relationship to nature. But I would say that a lot of those sort of sensibilities, for me anyway, kind of exist in art making and in the art world like this. And he uses this thing that, rather, when he talks about joy, he talks about it, it's not really happiness or euphoria. It's a kind of an outward thing. It's an extension of, although happiness and euphoria can be part of the vocabulary of joy, he says joy is sort of the feeling that you get when you find a lost child and they're fine, or you come across somebody who you've loved for a time but now begins to reciprocate that love. I mean, it's a different kind of phenomena, you know. And I think that for me, and I suppose in very practical terms, it's the art making process and being around curious and inquisitive people like yourself. It definitely approaches that joyful sensibility, you know.
Yeah.
I talk too much.
No, no, that was great, Nathaniel. And just because we have questions coming in, so I don't mean to pivot too much away from what you were just saying, and maybe we lost Susan, but hopefully she can find her way back. But that's fine. We have a question for you, Nathaniel. With the idea of keeping your day job a secret, do you see yourself as living a double life?
You know, I don't really keep it a secret. It's different to not mention something than to say it doesn't, you're not lying. You know, if people ask me, I'll tell them, and occasionally people will come up to me and, you know, confront me with an article or something in the office, and then I'm happy to talk about it, actually, and it's fine. But I tend not to, kind of like Susan, you know, people don't come to the office in general to talk to me about my artwork, you know,
Right.
but something else going on, and my job is to try to help them.
Hey, sorry,
And no, it's fine.
I lost
I don't know if you want to repeat the question, Abigail, so that
No,
Susan
we have a different question for Susan.
Okay, yeah,
so
sorry, I got I don't know, I lost connection somehow.
it was totally fine. Nathaniel answered a different question, so all good.
I'm back.
Welcome back. It was a big debut. Susan, so this person says, I saw work of Susan's that implements elements beyond cyanotype like gold leaf. How strict, playful does she see her definition as photographer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I consider myself a photographer. It's what I've done for a long time. Because I hand painted photographs, it started to bring me into that handmade and a little bit of painting world. And I tried other kinds of photography, color, like large, abstract, and it never really, you know, was something that was really in my heart. And when I came back to a handmade process, then I really connected with it, with cyanotype. So I guess the answer is primarily I consider myself a photographer, but I do add other elements sometimes if I feel like it's called for. And I will continue to do that in the future. And it's not something I plan ahead. It usually comes after I make the print and I feel like something's missing. That's usually how I approach it. Like something, like I like this, but something is not, it hasn't made it a finished piece. And so I'll try some paint or some ink. I love ink, gold ink. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Or I'll add watercolor to pieces. So I guess it's a little bit of a hybrid, and essentially cyanotype is also a printmaking medium. It's a monotype. You're putting things on a paper and you're exposing it and you're making a print. So it really is a hybrid of maybe three kinds of art. So, but really my heart and soul is in photography. I just got a new camera, and I photograph everything that's in my work, and I work on getting good photographs for each piece that's in there. And so that really is my primary concern when I'm starting out. And then as the print comes together, sometimes I do add other elements.
Can I?
Is that the answer?
Yeah.
Can I go back to the other question that you asked briefly? Although Susan, I really
About your
appreciate
double life?
Well, yeah, in the Susan, the question was, the implication was, are you duplicitous?
No. The question exactly
Well, yeah.
was, with the idea of keeping your day job a secret, do you see yourself as living a double life?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, and what I would say is actually in so many sort of core ways, that they all sort of pursue a similar thing in both the aspirationally, and it's not always the case in life actually, but aspirationally, the things that you're trying to do in the studio and as a clinician and as a teacher is to pursue what you think is the truth, and it's very hard to pursue the truth actually so much of the time. And for all sorts of reasons, partly because of the way our brain works and because of society and because of all sorts of things, it's very difficult. But I would say that in general, as a clinician, I'm trying to pursue what I think is the truth, what's really going on. And what I try to do as a teacher is demonstrate how difficult it is to approach the truth and how important it is to approach the truth. And then in the studio, I'm similarly trying to approach what I think is the true thing that I want to try to convey or share with other people or myself. And it's very difficult, actually. I find it to be a kind of a real wrestling match, sometimes on all fronts, actually. But it's fascinating, and it's kind of exhilarating when it works out, and it's true. I mean, I'll give you an example of that in how difficult it is in medicine. There was a person I came across in the context of COVID who had to change and smell, and it, of course, at first you think, oh, well, gee whiz, it's because of something like COVID, and it turned out to be a totally different phenomena that was deep inside his brain that was going on. And so, that is a core aspect of medicine, trying to look for what really is going on, and you take all this information and put it together. And the same thing is true in terms of the kind of wrestling match in the studio. You're trying to kind of go forward with what you think is the sort of goal or right way to go, and it's difficult sometimes to know, and you're sort of pulled because of you're wrong or you're off in various ways. But I think that whole process is it's such a lovely and wonderful and vigorous activity to be able to be a part of. And I only wish that I could have everybody have a chance to do that. Honestly, I think that there's the distinction between me and anyone else in terms of wanting to participate. It's been such a gift to be told as a young person when you're 5, 6, 7 that it's okay to make stuff and to participate in the world in an active way. And really it's because of your parents and your friends and your family that was an acceptable or even good thing to do. And I'm just so lucky to have had that.
Yeah, I don't feel I live a duplicitous life, although I do,
Exactly.
sometimes I do have to be careful that I'm not like centering conversations around, myself when I'm dealing with clients. I'm same for Nathaniel. And, it's not really in secret. It's just, I got to make a living. And so I know I chose real estate because it gave me that flexibility in time. And also I had the skills already, and I was already used to working for myself. I think that's a really key thing. Often people that come from a business environment in an office and they move to real estate, it's very hard for them to structure their day because they're used to somebody else structuring their day for them. I was already used to it. So I feel like I have a good flow, you know, and I'm pretty open about what I do in both, you know. And then there's the other way, like, do I tell like other artists and gallerists and people in the art world that I'm a realtor? Because a realtor is a little bit loaded, I think, like it is with a physician. Like, people, I think, have a certain idea what a realtor is. I know I did when I first started. I'm like, am I really gonna, do I fit into that world? Well, it's however you want to define it. You can, you know, you have your own niche and you have your own personality and your own chemistry with people, and you just define your own business. And that's, you know, that was my approach, you know. So, and at first I was a little shy about telling other artists I was a realtor, you know, like, I was like, oh, you know, maybe they won't think I'm serious, or there's like a hobby, you know. And really, I work so I can do the art, you know. I make the money so I can have enough money to pay my bills and buy my materials, you know. So, although I enjoy my job as a realtor very much, as it turns out, and
Well, and I think those are two really interesting points to end on, and make a lot of sense and are really great takeaways. I mean, Nathaniel, your point to being on an endless, you know, you're seeking out truth, and that, you know, that we'll always be looking into that and creating that and we'll try to do that through our shows. You'll do it through your artwork. And that's something that I think every artist could keep in the back of their minds. And then to Susan's point about, you know, doing something that helps support your art, and, you know, you don't have to hide it necessarily, or if you want to keep it private, certainly, like, do your own approach, and everything works differently for everyone. But once you kind of get into these flows and get your schedule over time, it won't happen overnight. Like it might seem like it has for these two. I can imagine there's been years of getting this all sorted. So it's really impressive what you both do, and we've loved having you on today. It's so much fun. And yeah, thank you.
thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Susan, and thank you so much, Kaylee, and, you know, thanks for having us on.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who joined today. And if you have any lingering questions, feel free to email us. If you want to see either of their artwork, you can always visit the gallery. And we hope to hear from you again and see you on future events. Bye, everyone.